The wind carried grit across the dry plains, whispering ghost stories through the bones of abandoned cattle pens and crumbling fence lines. It was 1878, and the frontier didn't forgive. It swallowed men whole, broke them down to ash and scars. On the edge of this unforgiving wilderness, nestled between rolling hills and a pine-choked ravine, stood a small ranch. Broken gate, empty fields, and a man with a stare as cold as Wyoming frost-dot Shepherd Boone was no stranger to loss. His face, weathered and quiet, bore the weight of things unspoken. He lived alone, save for a half-lame mule, a red dog missing one eye, and a rifle that hadn't seen peace since the war. His neighbors, few and far between, called him the ghost in the timber, partly because he rarely left his land, and partly because he never made a sound unless it mattered. He hadn't planned on going into town that evening, but a busted wagon axle and a stubborn mule changed his mind. Boone made it to Dry Creek just past sundown. The saloon lights flickered dimly, leaking out onto the dust-choked street like sickly lanterns in a fog. It was a place of noise-laughter that bordered on cruelty, music sour from an untuned piano, the kind of place where desperate men bet away names. He pushed through the doors with the deliberate patience of a man who'd once survived worse odds. The bar stilled for a moment, as folks recognized him, then turned back to their drinks. He ordered coffee instead of whiskey and sat in the darkest corner, back to the wall, hat low over his eyes. The ruckus started when a big-bellied man stumbled through the swinging doors, dragging a child by the wrist. She couldn't have been more than 10. Mud stained her nightgown. Her feet were bare and cut, her face streaked with grime. She didn't cry, didn't fight, just looked ahead, eyes wide and blank like she'd long since stopped seeing. "Got me a mouth to feed I can't afford," the drunk slurred, yanking her forward. "She don't talk, don't listen. Deaf as a stump, ain't worth a damn." Someone laughed near the bar. Another man slapped down a coin. "Ain't worth a damn, but I'll pay $50 to shut her in the barn overnight." More laughter. The girl's face didn't change. She just stood there. Her knees wobbled. Her hands shook. But she never made a sound. Boone didn't move. At first, he just watched. The drunk banged the counter with an empty bottle. $10. She eats less than a dog and don't backtalk. Hell of a deal. A bartender, tired of the show, said, "Ain't no auction here, Denny. Take her out before the sheriff hears." Denny snarled. "Then someone best buy her quick, 'fore I throw her in the river." The room quieted. For a long moment, only the hum of the wind outside filled the silence. Boone stood, walked to the bar, and placed a single gold coin down. The barkeep blinked. The drunk stared. The girl didn't move. Boone didn't say a word, just looked Denny in the eye. Something in that look quiet, dangerous, the kind of stare that belonged to a man who'd buried too many made Denny's breath hitch. "That enough?" Boone said, voice low and dry. The drunk grabbed the coin, muttered something about fools and fool's gold, and stumbled back out into the night, bottle swinging in his hand. The girl stood still. Boone knelt, gently unwrapped her fingers from her own wrist, and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer one. They left town without looking back. The ride home took hours. Stars wheeled above them, distant and cold. Boone kept one hand on the reins, and the other resting on the stock of his rifle. The girl rode behind him, arms wrapped tightly around his middle, small hands trembling every time the horse's hooves struck a stone. She didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't sleep. And Boone didn't ask why. By the time they reached the ranch, dawn crept over the hills like a thief. Boone dismounted, lifted her down, and gestured to the cabin door. She hesitated, then followed. Inside, the fire had long since died. Boone lit a lamp, its flickering light revealing cracked walls, patched quilts, and the heavy smell of solitude. He pointed toward a cot in the corner, set a clean blanket beside it, then left her alone. He made coffee and stared out the window. Watching the sky change Dot in the days that followed, she stayed quiet. She followed Boone around the ranch like a shadow. He gave her tasks, feeding the chickens, sweeping the porch, oiling water, and she did them without complaint. Her movements were careful, practiced, as though she expected punishment for getting anything wrong. Boone didn't speak much, but when he did, it was clear and slow. "You ain't a servant," he said one morning. "You just live here now." She didn't nod, but she heard him, or at least understood. That night, he found a drawing left on the table. A chicken, a bucket, and a small figure holding a broom. It was crudely done, but unmistakable. The next morning, she was already outside. When he woke, carrying wood, lighting the stove, moving through routine like she'd been born to it. He caught her humming once, just a breath of sound, barely audible, but when she saw him watching, she stopped. One night, a storm rolled in. Thunder broke across the land like cannon fire. The animals panicked. Boone threw on his coat and ran for the corral, yelling over the wind. The girl followed without being asked. Lightning tore the sky, and a tree splintered near the barn. She didn't flinch. Instead, she helped guide the mule back inside, hands steady even as hail pelted down like gunshot knocked by the end of it. Boone was soaked, exhausted, and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. She handed him a rag without a word. He took it and met her gaze. "You ain't afraid of storms," he said. She looked away, but he caught the flicker in her eyes. "You heard it coming," he murmured. "Didn't you?" She didn't answer. He didn't press. That night, he sat by the fire, nursing his wound. She lay curled up on the cot, blanket tight around her. He hummed softly, without thinking a tune his wife used to sing. It was something old, wordless, full of ache. Halfway through, he looked up Dot. She was mouthing the notes. Boone said nothing. He simply watched, eyes narrowed, heart beginning to stir. Weeks passed. The ranch thawed into spring. Snow melted into mud, and grass returned in patchy swaths. The girl still nameless tended to the animals, like she'd always belonged. Boone began to speak more. Short sentences, instructions, observations, stories. Sometimes she never replied, but she listened. One day, she placed a hand over her chest and pointed to him. Then to herself, Boone frowned. "You want me to call you something?" She repeated the motion, pointed again. He scratched his beard, then said softly, "Clara, that was what I would have named my daughter." She smiled. Not wide, not loud, but it was a smile, and it hit him like a shot to the chest. That Clara. The name hung in the air like a prayer. From then on, things changed. Not fast, not loud, but real. She began to draw more little pictures on scraps of paper, pieces of cloth, sometimes even the dirt. A bird, a tree, a woman holding a baby. Boone kept them all in a box under the stove. He noticed more. How she would turn her head slightly when he spoke. How she avoided walking near loud tools. How she reacted faster to vibrations than to voices. She wasn't deaf. She just pretended to be. Boone didn't understand why. Not yet, but he respected it. In his own way, he understood hiding from sound. Sound brought memories. Memories brought pain. And came the day she sang. They were repairing the fence near the south ridge. Boone worked silently, hammering nails. She carried planks. Somewhere between strikes, she started humming. Then it grew. Words soft and broken, shaped by a voice unused to forming them. She sang just a verse. a tune Boone hadn't heard since his wife's funeral. He froze. She stopped. "Where'd you hear that?" he asked. She looked at him, uncertain, then said barely a whisper, "My mama." It was the first time she'd spoken to him. His hammer dropped. For a long time, neither of them moved. Boone knelt beside her, eyes stinging. "You can hear." She nodded slowly. He didn't ask how or why. He just said, "It's all right." And it was. That night, she sat by the fire with him. He told her about the war, about the baby he never held, about the wife he buried under a cottonwood tree. He didn't cry. But when he stopped, she leaned her head on his arm. For the first time in years, Shepherd Boone didn't feel haunted. He felt heard, and though neither of them said it, something had changed. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore, It was understood, and in that understanding, something fragile and beautiful began to grow. But silence, like all things, holds secrets, and secrets always demand to be heard. Boone watched the morning sun rise like an old memory, slow, familiar, and reluctant. The frost had thinned, and Clara, now comfortably wrapped in a wool cloak she'd stitched from scraps, stood near the paddock, feeding the mule. Her movements had changed. They were smoother now, more certain. Gone was the trembling hesitation of the girl he'd first brought home. What remained was someone becoming real again, piece by quiet piece. She hadn't spoken again since that day on the ridge. But the silence between them had shifted. It no longer felt like a void. It was something shared, intentional. Boone spoke when he needed to. Clara listened. And in the spaces where words didn't fit, gestures, looks, and presence did more than voices ever could. They built things together. Not just fences or repairs, but trust, unspoken and carefully. In the weeks that followed, Boone started noticing things. Subtle things. Clara would pause when the kettle whistled, not from its sound, but from the vibration against the counter. She'd step lightly on the wooden floorboards when they creaked. When a hawk cried out overhead, she'd glance up just before the echo reached the cabin walls. She wasn't deaf, but she wasn't ready to hear either. Whatever silence she had chosen was still her shelter. Boone understood that. He, too, had chosen silence once. The forest beyond the ranch had begun to awaken for the season. Birds returned, pine needles glistened in the early dew, and animal tracks appeared in the soft dirt near the barn. Boone took to hunting farther out than usual. Clara, though nervous at first, began asking to come along not in words, but by packing supplies and waiting beside the saddle. They walked the trail quietly, Boone leading, Clara keeping pace. She'd learned to read his movements, to follow his eyes and the tilt of his head like language. When he held up a hand, she stopped. When he crouched, she mirrored him. They tracked a small herd of deer across the ridge, Boone signaling the shapes of prints, Clara nodding with curiosity. Her hands dirty, but eager. It was on one of those long walks that they encountered the stranger. He stood at the tree line, barely visible against the trunk of a scorched pine. A tall figure, broad-shouldered, motionless. Boone noticed him first and instinctively stepped in front of Clara. His hand hovered near his rifle. The man raised both hands slowly. No weapon, just a leather pouch at his waist, a longbow slung over one shoulder. His face was marked by age and ash, the deep-cut lines of someone who'd seen fire and walked through it. Boone didn't lower his guard. The stranger finally spoke, his voice calm and deliberate. "You're on old land?" Boone nodded once. "I've lived here 10 years. Never seen you before." The man stepped forward, the forest not even crunching under his feet. "You weren't looking." Clara peeked out from behind Boone's coat, her eyes curious, unafraid. The stranger met her gaze, then Boone's. "Storms coming, wolves too, North Ridge." Boone gave the sky a brief glance, reading the clouds like old letters. Appreciate. The warning. The man turned without another word, vanishing back into the timber as if the forest had folded around him. That night, the air shifted. The wind blew colder, sharper. Boone checked the traps near the riverbed while Clara prepared. Extra bedding for the animals. The silence of the plains was thicker than usual. Even the birds were gone. The wolves came just after midnight. Boone heard the first howl before the cattle panicked. A low, mournful call that seemed to shiver through the ground. By the time he reached the barn, the animals were already thrashing. Clara stood in the doorway, a lantern clutched in her hands, eyes wide but not panicked. Back inside, Boone ordered, voice firm. But she didn't move. Another howl. Closer. Then came the sound of splintering wood and the sharp yelp of the mule. Boone cocked the rifle and stepped into the yard, heart pounding against the quiet night. His boots crunched frost. Clara followed at a distance, her small shadow stretching behind her in the flickering light. From the edge of the corral, movement. 2 wolves, lean and gray, stalking through the fence. Boone raised his rifle. A third shape darted in from the side, snarling. A shot cracked the silence. The first wolf dropped. The others lunged. Boone fell back, kicking wildly. A fourth wolf tore through the underbrush. Then came the hiss of an arrow. A blur moved from the trees. 1 wolf yelped and collapsed mid-leap. The remaining 2 scattered, disappearing into the shadows. Boone pushed himself up, shoulder bleeding from a shallow cut. He turned, rifle ready. The stranger stepped into the clearing, bow drawn, 1 final arrow knocked but unloosed. He glanced at Boone, then Clara, then lowered his weapon. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Boone said, "You have a name?" They. Man nodded. "Red Elk. You following us?" "I follow signs." She left them. He nodded toward Clara. Boone looked at her. She stared back at Red Elk, eyes narrowed, assessing, not afraid. Just uncertain. Red Elk crouched beside her. He didn't speak at first. Then he tapped his ear, then his heart. She hears. Just not always the way others do. Boone didn't respond. He just watched. Red Elk stood and motioned toward the forest. Wolves won't return soon, but they remember. They always do. In the weeks that followed, Red Elk visited the ranch several times. Sometimes with herbs, sometimes pelts, sometimes with nothing but silence. He never entered the house, but Clara began leaving small drawings for him on a flat rock near the barn. Simple things. A feather, a deer. One day, a drawing of a wolf, with a red mark across its back. Red Elk would always leave something in return. A smooth stone, a knotted bundle of dried flowers, a carved stick. Boone never asked what it meant. He understood it didn't need explaining. One day, Clara pointed at the carved stick and then to herself. Red Elk said, "She chooses a name." Boone raised an eyebrow. "She already has one." Red Elk smiled faintly. "Clara is yours. This is hers." She held the stick in both hands like it was sacred. Boone didn't argue. Spring deepened. The land came alive again. But peace on the frontier was borrowed time. It was Clara who noticed them first. 3 riders, dusty and grim, standing at the edge of the southern fence line. She saw them while gathering eggs. Didn't speak. Didn't point. She simply walked back to the cabin, found Boone, and tugged his sleeve once. He stepped onto the porch and saw them. Strangers. Or so he thought. One of the men spat into the dirt. "Heard you got a little girl living here." Boone didn't move. "She used to belong to a friend of ours. Man named Denny." Boone's eyes narrowed. "That so?" The tallest rider leaned forward in the saddle. She run off. We come to take her back. Boone's voice was ice. You won't. The men laughed. She ain't worth dying for, old man. Boone raised the rifle. Clara stepped beside him. The shortest of the men face scarred, hands twitchy spoke. Next, heard she don't talk, don't hear. Might as well be livestock. Boone didn't respond. Clara, instead, stepped forward and drew something in the dirt with her boot. A figure standing behind three smaller ones. A rifle between them. The tall man smirked. She draws pictures now. Cute. A low whistle cut the air. Red elk emerged from the trees behind the cabin, bow slung but ready. The men hesitated. The tall one spat again. Fine, keep her. But this ain't over. They turned and rode off, kicking up dust and threat behind them. Boone exhaled. Clara stared into the distance long after they were gone. That night, they doubled the locks. Boone sat by the fire, his shoulder tight with tension. Clara sat across. From him, sketching quietly. You were brave, he said. She looked up. You didn't run. She picked up her drawing and turned it around. It was a sketch of Boone, rifle in hand, standing between her and three wolves with human faces. He didn't speak. She set the paper down and finally said, soft but clear, I'm tired of hiding. Boone nodded. So was he. He hadn't realized it until now, but every day since the war, he'd been waiting for something to break the silence inside him, something worth speaking to, something that deserved the noise. Red Elk spoke softly the next morning while watching the horizon. They'll return. Boone nodded. I know. She needs to learn. Boone looked at Clara. She's ready, Red Elk added. The next week was filled with preparation. Boone taught her to fire the revolver. Red Elk showed her how to walk without sound, how to see what others missed. They used signals, nods, a system of glances and gestures that spoke louder than words. Clara learned fast, faster than Boone expected. Not because she was fearless, but because she was done being afraid. And every night, when the fire was low and the ranch was quiet, Boone would watch her sleep, curled beneath the quilt she had stitched herself. He would watch and wonder not how he'd changed her life, but how she had changed his. Then one night, as thunder echoed in the far distance and coyotes howled along the ridgeline, Boone stepped outside and whispered to the darkness. She hears everything now. And in the silence that followed, something old in him let go. He didn't know yet what was coming, but for the first time in years, he would meet it without running. And Clara, no longer a silent shadow, would stand beside him. The night they came back, the air felt different, denser, like it held its breath before the storm. Boone had felt it all day in the bones of the earth, in the way the birds had stopped singing, in the way Clara's hand lingered a second too, long on the latch of the barn gate. The wind moved through the trees like it was searching for something, and the sky turned the color of old bruises, warning of more than rain. Clara stood barefoot on the porch just after sunset, her braid frayed. By the breeze, eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the pasture. Boone joined her with a quiet nod, setting his rifle down gently against the rail. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of waiting, of readiness. Red Elk appeared. At dusk, as he often did in recent days, emerging from the dark without sound, his bow slung low, the quiver on his back full, as if he too had sensed that tonight would require more than just watching. He said little, simply nodded once to Boone, then to Clara, before kneeling near the fire pit and sharpening his blade. Inside the cabin, everything had its place now. The revolver rested fully loaded beside the lantern. Clara had carved notches into the bed frame, small, deliberate markings that meant something only to her. Boone had come to recognize that pattern of hers, the way she built meaning through small actions, quiet gestures, like someone laying down roots without asking permission from the land. Boone checked the gates again, re-secured the barn doors, ran his hand along the edge of the fence that Clara had mended herself 2 days before. He remembered how she'd smiled when he told her the boards would hold. Now, he hoped she'd been right. The first figure stepped out of the trees just past midnight. Moonlight cut through the clouds in broken shards, enough to see the glint of metal, the shape of men on horseback. 3 at first, then 2 more. Then a 6th on foot, carrying something heavy, likely dynamite, Boone thought. He didn't flinch. He simply turned, tapped once on the wooden post outside the cabin. Clara appeared at the doorway, rifle in hand. Red Elk was already moving. The men came in slow, a crooked line of silhouettes against the horizon. Boone stepped out to meet them halfway across the yard, rifle slung but not raised. The lead rider dismounted tall, sun-leathered, and wearing a grin that meant trouble. Boone recognized him now. The same sneer, the same eyes, from that day near the fence. "You didn't think we'd forget, did you?" The man said. "I hoped you would," Boone replied. The man laughed. "That little girl ain't yours. Never was. She ain't yours either. You bought her, from a drunk. You think that makes her yours?" Boone didn't answer. "She's just a broken thing," the man continued, stepping forward. "Don't talk, don't hear. A mouth to feed, nothing more. You keepin' her out here like she's something worth fighting for?" He spat into the dirt. "You're the fool, Boone." Boone raised his eyes, not to the man, but to the trees behind him. Movement. Clara. Positioning herself quietly behind the chicken coop with the rifle. Red Elk had shortened for her grip. Boone gave no signal, but he knew she was ready. "She's more than you'll ever be?" Boone said. The smile dropped from the man's face. "You forget who we are?" He growled. "No," Boone said, voice quiet. "But you forgot what I am." He fired first. The shot cracked across the yard, echoing into the hills. The tall man collapsed sideways, his pistol never drawn. Chaos exploded in that moment. Horses reared, men shouted, boots slammed into the ground. Red Elk moved like wind through branches, loosing arrows with deadly calm. Clara took her first shot and missed, the bullet punching harmlessly into a water barrel. Boone dropped another with a second shot, then ducked behind the porch rail. Splinters flew around him as bullets struck the wood. One grazed his side. Warm blood soaked into his shirt. A man charged the door. Clara met him with the barrel of her rifle. The shot was deafening. He crumpled, his face twisting in disbelief. As he fell, smoke coiled over the pasture. The barn caught fire. Someone had tossed a torch during the scramble. Flames bloomed along the hay, creeping up the side like fingers. Boone rushed forward, rifle empty, swinging it like a club. He took down the man with the dynamite pack, tackled him hard, fists landing in quick, practiced bursts. The man didn't get back up. Clara reloaded. Her hands trembled, but didn't stop. Red Elk let out a sharp whistle. 3 short bursts. Clara turned, saw a man sneaking behind the outhouse. She steadied her breath and fired. This time, her shot hit true. The man spun and collapsed. The remaining 2 scattered. One ran into the darkness, the other toward the flaming barn. Boone limped after him, but fell hard on one knee, pain flaring through his leg. He fired a last shot. It missed. Red Elk moved past him silently, vanishing into the smoke. A moment later, a scream cut through the night, then silence. Only the fire remained now, crackling louder than any voice. Boone stumbled to his feet, Clara already at his side. Her eyes scanned him, checking for blood, for breath. He winced as she helped him up, his hand gripping her shoulder. "You're all right," he said. "You're all right." She didn't answer with words. She just nodded, fierce and proud. They moved to the barn. Red Elk was already inside, throwing water from the trough onto the spreading flames. Clara joined him. Together they beat the fire back with wet blankets, Boots kicking at the embers. Boone staggered to help, his body screaming with every movement. By dawn, the fire was out. Smoke clung to everything. The barn was scorched, but standing. A calf lay dead, but the others had survived. Boone sat on the porch steps, shirt soaked in blood and sweat, breathing like each breath was a task. Clara brought him water, then sat beside him. Red Elk stood by the tree line, arms crossed. "You knew they'd come," Boone said quietly. Red Elk nodded. "Men like that always come back. I should have taken her farther, hid her better." Red Elk didn't reply. Clara looked up at Boone. "You didn't hide me," she said. Her voice, so rare and deliberate, cut through the morning hush like truth. "You gave me a place." Boone closed his eyes. "I thought I was saving you." "He?" said Clara rested her head against his arm. "You were," she whispered. "And I was saving you." Red Elk stepped forward. "The land knows what's done here. It won't forget." Boone looked up. "Will they come again?" "Maybe," Red Elk said. "But they'll know what waits here now." They buried the bodies near the south fence. No prayers, just earth and sweat and the sound of shovels hitting stone. Boone didn't mark the graves. He didn't need to. The wind would remember. That night, they sat around a smaller fire. Boone's arm was wrapped tightly. Red Elk had stitched the wound with steady hands. Clara leaned against Boone's shoulder, fingers tracing patterns on the sleeve of his coat. She spoke again, soft as breath. "I'm not afraid anymore." Boone didn't answer. He didn't need to. The quiet was enough. In the days that followed, the ranch returned to its rhythm. The chickens resumed their nervous clucking. The mule limped, but still hauled water. Clara planted new herbs near the cabin wall. Boone fixed the fence, slower now, with Clara watching to make sure he didn't lift more than he could carry. Red Elk stayed a while longer, helping rebuild the barn. He didn't speak of leaving, but Boone knew it was coming. One morning Clara gave him a drawing, 3 figures standing before a fire, behind them the rising sun. Red Elk smiled, tucked it into his pouch, and nodded. On his last day, he stood beside Boone by the tree line. "She's strong," Red Elk said. "She is." Boone replied, "She'll grow more." Boone turned to him. "She's my daughter now." Red Elk gave a long, slow nod. "She always was. You just didn't know it." He vanished into the trees once more, the forest reclaiming him like a secret. Weeks passed. Clara spoke more now. Not often, and never loudly. But when she did, Boone listened like it was scripture. They didn't need much, just the land, the sky, and each other. Boone started writing again. Short lines in a journal he'd kept hidden for years. Stories, memories, descriptions of the world through Clara's eyes. Her silence, her laughter. The strength she found in both. She carved a symbol into the porch rail one afternoon. A bird, with open wings. Boone asked her what it meant. "It means we hear each other," she said. He smiled, a real one this time, and looked out across the plains. They had come through fire, through silence, through the worst of men. And what remained was not broken. What remained was family. And though the world beyond the hills still carried danger, and the past still whispered its old wounds, the ranch held its ground. And in the cool quiet that followed, there was peace, not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of understanding. And that was enough. More than enough.